So JavaScript actually implemented many types of for loops. In this video, I want to talk about each one of them and make sure you understand where each one of them is useful. So first things first, we have the simple standard for loop like in any other language. So the first and simplest for loop that you can find in basically any other language out there is a simple for that has an initialization part, right? So we say let I equals 0, then it has a condition part, I less than 10, for example, and then it has a final expression part. I would call it an increment because usually that's what it is, and just I++. And here we can type in whatever we want. Let's say console log I plus, like that. And if we try to run this, you'll notice that we get every single digit from 0 to 9, right? Simple enough, I'm sure you understand, but for the people out there that still don't understand how exactly this for loop works, it's like so. So the first expression that gets executed is the initialization. Then it checks the condition. Is it true? Is it false? If it's true, it executes whatever is in the for loop, right? And after executing it, it increments or executes this last part of the for loop, and then gets back to condition, and so on and so forth until this condition is false, right? Simple enough. I'm sure you've heard this a million times, but I have still saw people that didn't know how exactly this works. Okay, now the second for loop is called a for in, and we will need an array to iterate over to use this properly. So we're gonna say let, for example, primes equals the numbers 2, 3, 5, 7, and 11. All right, and now to use this, we just say for, then let something like a field in whatever array or object you want to iterate over. Now what's gonna happen if I try to console log this field? Let's take a look here. As you'll notice, we get every single digit from 0 to 4, but wait a second, that's wrong, right? I mean, we have an array that holds every single prime until 11. Why do we get 0 to 4? The answer is actually very, very, very simple. This for in loop, instead of iterating through the values of the array, it actually iterates through the properties of the array. And in this case, they are actually numbers. To better understand this, I have created instead an object that has the properties a, b, and c, and the values 2, 3, and 5, right? And if I try to run this now, you'll notice that we get a, b, and c. So these properties, that's what I'm talking about. Behind the scenes, arrays are actually just objects with numbers as properties, right? So this would be the value of primes of 0, right? So that's how the for in loop works. Now, if you wanted to make use of it, you would do it by simply saying primes of field, and that would actually evaluate whatever property name you have in here. So instead of just printing the property names, you take the value of that property and it simply prints out 2, 3, and 5 of this object. Simple enough, right? Alright, so this is a simple way to iterate over the properties of an object if you really need them, right? Now, there's the third for loop that is sort of an improvement over this one. And that is a for off, right? So instead of in, we say for off. And now if we try to actually run this, just by changing this into an off, you'll notice that we get an error that says type error primes is not iterable. Because a for off loop actually iterates over iterable, well, objects. And an object like this one is not actually iterable. You don't have anything to iterate over. But if we try to use an array instead of an object, just like so, and instead of printing primes of field, just field itself, you'll notice that we get the actual values inside the array. No longer do we have to get the value from the property, right? So that's what's really cool about this for of loop. Of course, technically, you can actually use object.keys, just like so, object.keys of whatever object you want to iterate over to get over the properties of the object. So if I go like so, you'll notice that we get A, B, and C. And if I try to do primes of that, this should be pretty obvious that we'll get the same result as a for in loop. And I really do suggest you use this instead of the for in loop, right? As this is more new and much more supported by other browsers, right? Now, one more thing to note here is that the for of loop can actually be used in tandem with generators. So generators are fairly simple to understand. They are just functions that simply return multiple values during its lifetime. They're automatically gathered by the interpreter and spat out once it's finished executing, right? So you declare a generator by saying function asterisk, that's shift 8 on the keyboard, and let's call this primes as well, just a function this time. And instead of saying return something, you say yield. So you yield a value, like so, right? And now if I try to run this, you'll notice that we get 2 in here because we've actually iterated over the results of primes, which was just 2. But this is the really important part. You can actually say yield 3, yield 5, and yield 7, and yield 11. Just like so. And when I try to run this, you'll notice that we get all the results here. And this can be really useful when you're trying to make code much more readable by simply removing arrays from the equation, by just letting the language do the work of taking all the variables, bringing it in a list or array or iterable or whatever it is that's pretty darn optimized, and returning it once finished executing. So that's all 3 for loops that we have in JavaScript, right? There's the classic for loop that you always work with probably since first working with programming languages. Then there's the for in loop, which works on the properties of an object, or the keys, however you want to call them. And there's the for of loop, the more recent one and much more updated and much more nice to use, that lets you iterate over arrays and generator functions. So I hope this was helpful to clarify some confusions about all the different for loops in JavaScript. Alright, thanks for watching and see you guys next time.